Hello and welcome to Emergent Technology. This is Andrew. Thanks for joining me again on this video. Today I have something new that took me over a month to get, which is the Canon RF 100-400. This is a lens I purchased alongside the new Canon RF 16mm f2.8. Two relatively affordable non-L lenses, which I wanted to put to the test against some of my better L glass. I'm here in Santa Rosa, California on a park trail with a beautiful view overlooking the sunrise here, and I'm going to be taking a few photos and sharing them with you in this video. So come along with me for this test. Really scientific, of course, but just in the first few shots I've taken, I've noticed just how good the image stabilization is when combining the inbuilt body IS on the R6 along with the image stabilizer on this new 100-400. I'm pretty impressed. It seems like I'm getting pretty sharp pictures down to like a hundredth of a second at 400mm, which to me is really great. Of course, this isn't going to really help for action, but for landscapes when you're trying to reduce your ISO, really good so far. So let's get these back onto the computer and take a look. All right, now that we're back at the computer, here's what we're going to be looking at. This is my import of the photos I've taken with the new RF 100-400, along with a couple thrown in here of the new 16mm f2.8 that I took a few days ago. So let's get right to it here. And here they are. The very first photo I took this morning with that 100-400 is this picture right here. This is straight out of the camera, raw. This is at 281mm at f8, which is wide open at this point on this lens, and this was taken from a pretty good distance away. Of course, when I zoom in, I've got a little bit of sensor dust from my R6, which is kind of par for the course, but I plan on cleaning that soon. So this is a 4K monitor, which means that when I zoom in to 100%, I'm not really getting that many more pixels on the screen than if I zoomed out just a little bit to fit. So far, so good. Really sharp, wide open, sharper than I even expected, even towards those edges. But let's go ahead and bring that exposure up a little bit and look in the shadows and see what kind of sharpness we're getting. So looking down here, we're resolving some really excellent detail in the shadows. Of course, this is ISO 400, so with the low amount of light that we had this morning, we're going to get a little bit of that noise, but you know, so far so good. I'm going to take those shadows back down because we're not going for HDR right now. Not bad. So moving forward a little bit, I'm going to go for more of a landscape photo here. This one was taken at 100mm at f8. So stop down a little bit, I think about one stop from wide open. And wow, this is really sharp in the corners. I mean, look at that. Even in the far right corner, getting some excellent sharpness. If I zoom into 200, going to exaggerate that a little bit, but still very surprisingly sharp in the corners. I previously owned the EF 100-400L Mark II, and that lens was sharp, but it was a tank compared to this. And of course, a little bit faster, but this is really almost on par with the sharpness. So let's keep going. This photo is going to be a real stretch for this lens. Not only are we at a 400mm focal length, but we're going across miles and miles of distance here, which introduces environmental haze as well. So that being considered, this is still really sharp for what it is. This is ISO 2000. So let's go ahead and edit this photo to how I would publish it online and see what the final results look like. First thing I'm noticing with this is the vignetting. So I don't have the camera profile turned on yet, but let's take a look here and see if it pulls it up. It does not, Lightroom does not have a profile yet, so I'm just going to jump in here and say that this is a 100-500, and that might solve some of this. A little bit of distortion changes there, but if I uncheck this, it did apply some vignetting correction. We're going to correct even more vignetting here. And that looks to be a little bit better, but still we're seeing some vignetting, which is characteristic of this type of lens. At a long focal length. So going even further, let's go ahead and clone out some of this sensor dust, and we'll see where this takes us. Even have what appears to be a bird in flight, but I'm going to clone that out anyway. So here is more or less how I would post this picture online. This is a very contrasty image with some detail lost in the shadows, but of course this is early morning when the light is not so good, and again we're at 400 millimeters across a vast amount of terrain. Here's a more traditional landscape that you'd see that incorporates elements of foreground and background, and the background in this image is probably these hills are about 10 miles away, and the foreground of course is within a few hundred feet. So first thing I would do to this picture is straighten the horizon a little bit, and then take it from there. Overall, the exposure on this is pretty good. Probably bump it up a little bit, save some of the highlights, maybe tweak my white balance to make it a little bit warmer and increase the saturation a tiny bit. And that's probably even too saturated. Looking a little closer at this picture, this is f8, 1/100th of a second at 135 millimeters. Very, very sharp. I'm really pleased with the amount of sharpness in this from the foreground all the way through the background, even though the background is going to be a little bit out of focus. Let's now look at a slightly more challenging situation here. This is a pseudo macro photo here taken at 100 millimeters, wide open at f8, ISO 4000 at 1/80th of a second. And wow, for handheld at 100, not bad. 80th of a second, not bad. I'm going to go ahead and tweak this one a little bit to be a little bit closer to how I'd post it online. Overall, not bad. The quality of the bokeh is decent. I'd say it's not going to be a super strong bokeh at 100 millimeters, but let's go to 400 millimeters and see how that looks. Here is a photo taken at 335 millimeters, again wide open at f8, ISO 4000 and 1/80th of a second. And we are still getting absolutely crystal clear pictures with that combined IS between the body and the lens. This is phenomenal. So I'm going to up the exposure on that a little bit. And we're retaining some excellent detail here. You know, I'm not too much of a pixel peeper when it comes to this sort of thing, so I'm not going to be talking too much about things like chromatic aberration or, you know, spherical aberration, but overall really good. And the quality of the bokeh itself is pretty pleasing for the most part. The water on the blades of grass in the background is very nice and circular. I'm enjoying this picture. This is very nice looking. Here's another photo we can look at that's really going to kind of max out the capabilities of this lens. This is taken at 400 millimeters. It's a combination of a close-up of a tree branch with the landscape in the background stopped all the way down to f18, where we are going to start to get other types of aberrations that happen when you close the aperture down that much. Again, ISO 4000 at 160th of a second, and looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and edit this a little bit more and get it up to my online standard. Not too bad overall. Pleasing on the color. Of course, we do get some noise in here at ISO 4000, but nothing compared to what even ISO 1600 used to look like on previous generations of cameras. This is going to be one of the most challenging pictures here. This ridge here is at least 10 or 15 miles off in the distance. It is a very, very challenging scene. Not a whole lot of light here. Shooting at f13 at 1/640th of a second at ISO 4000. And I'm going to clone out some of that sensor dust, of course, if my patch tool works. There we go. You know, not terrible, not awful, but not great either. Especially when I start bumping up that exposure. This is more of a factor of the camera at this point than it is the lens. But it is focused on that ridge, and for the most part, it's as sharp as it's going to get. You know, not bad. I've seen definitely worse. Canon has made many, many generations of utterly terrible 100 to 300 millimeter lenses, and this far exceeds it in every way possible. I promised you we were on our last photo, but I promise this is actually the last one. This one is kind of a medium distance telephoto shot about 2 miles away, and that way we're not losing too much to environmental haze, but looking pretty sharp considering the exposure, considering the noise, considering the low levels of light out. Pretty pleased with this one. I'm going to take all these 1-star photos that I just edited, and we're going to export these, and I'll have a link in the description to the full gallery so that if you are one of those pixel peepers, you can take a closer look. Thanks for stopping by Emergent Technology to see this brief overview of the new Canon RF 100 to 400 millimeter non-L telephoto zoom lens. Stop by for our next video, which will be also a brief overview of the new Canon RF 16 millimeter f2.8. Cheers.